to the TOD Forum Working with ULI for our Technical Assistance Panel. This morning we've had the great pleasure and honor of having experts look at 6 potential TOD sites here in the Twin Cities that Metro Transit owns. And we are now going to get the informative session of knowing the summary results. So I'm going to turn the program over to John Breitinger, but before I do, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to recognize our partners in ULI and our partners in the cities, the city staff who've been so very helpful this morning. And now, John, you can take it away.
Welcome. I've lost track of the order of things here. If there's anybody in the room who doesn't know about the Urban Land Institute, ULI is a collection of public and private land use professionals get together to try to make our communities better. And the work that we're doing here is part of our advisory services group. It's a technical assistance panel. So we're called on by mostly cities, communities, public entities that have development challenges and want help. And so we bring together panels of experts, typically from the private side. Today's panel is a group of developers who will meet in just a second. And we look at these sites. In this case, these are sites that are owned by the Metro Transit that want to get employed in service of transit in that community. And so what we're going to talk about today are 6 very, very diverse sites that weren't really chosen because one of them is sacred, but because collectively they really reflect all of the issues that come up in this kind of development. With that, I'd like to ask the panelists each to just introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what you do.
Sure. My name is Erica Dowdy. I work at Art Space Projects, Inc. I'm in the asset management department, but I also work very closely with the development department. We develop affordable and work housing and spaces for artists and their families all across the country. I've been working in Minneapolis.
My name is Katie Anthony, and I'm in the development group at Schaefer Richardson. We're a local real estate developer and property owner. We do primarily mixed-use, multifamily developments and repositioning of industrial properties.
Good afternoon, I'm Stu Ackerberg with the Ackerberg Group. We're a Minneapolis-based, urban-focused investor and developer of commercial property.
I'm John Breitinger with Cushman and Wakefield, the development advisory practice. I've spent the last 30 years doing mostly redevelopment and workouts and stuff, things that aren't working. So this is looking for value.
Patrick Daly, Ryan Companies, nationally based developer that's headquartered here in Minneapolis. We do developments across all disciplines and are fully integrated, so construction, A&E, capital markets, property management. We do a lot of those principles inside our own house.
And I'm Diana Dicey. I'm a project manager in the real estate department at Common Bond Communities. Common Bond is a nonprofit affordable housing provider with our central office in St. Paul, and we operate in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And my role is primarily to develop new construction and acquire affordable housing developments.
Good afternoon, my name is Bill Kavanaugh. I'm a developer at Opus. For the risk of maybe brevity, we're about as close to what Ryan is. Network vertically integrated developer on a national platform with our headquarters in Minnetonka, but we work across pretty much all asset categories, and we're just excited to share some of the findings today as we discuss the panel.
So we've got a terrific panel. We spent the morning with the city officials and Metro Transit staff talking about each one of these sites. And so what we're going to do is take you through a tour of these 6 sites, and one of our panelists will talk about each one. We're open to, we're going to have to sort of see how this goes, but typically we like to have this be a dialogue, so we're open to questions and comments as we go along. And we've empowered Kathy to keep an eye on the clock and make sure that we keep moving. And at the end of the day, our objective is really to help kind of boil all this down to a set of principles that will help both the private sector think about the opportunity that might exist in these lands that are in the transit corridors, and really more than anything to give the public sector feedback on how they can attract and encourage high-quality development that's going to really contribute to life in their communities. So with that, let's dig in.
So I think I'm on first, and I want to be kind of thoughtful about time, simply because of the fact I don't want the last week to not get any time. So I think probably the biggest thing that we looked at as it relates to the 28th Avenue Station Park and Ride, which conveniently is located right here. It's two parcels that have been separated by Lindell Lane, and one of the things that you don't quite get to read on this, but is the reality of you have some underground stormwater and some parkland that are encumbering the properties. What we had discussed as a group, and I think it probably resonates, is that you got basically a 90-foot sliver of land up on the north side of Lindell Lane that candidly probably is going to be a better pedestrian scale type linear park. Pretty tough to activate that with any meaningful development, especially because of the flight path. What that would enable you to do is then clean up the larger chunk of the 6.9 acre site and really kind of take advantage of the most obvious structure there, which is the parking deck. One of the things that's unique about this area is that there is developable land that the city of Bloomington is actively kind of getting positioned to meet the market. And at the risk of saying this site has to be reactive to the market, I do think that it's going to be somewhat of a consequence of the energy that's going to be created. If you could imagine outside of this map, you've got the Mall of America as a large activity node, and then you've got the entire medical campus just to the east of this. And what this doesn't quite show yet is that there's a new parking ramp that basically is adjacent to 30th Avenue. So it's maybe not the most pleasant pedestrian scale type environment. So what we thought about from a development solution might be something to really try to activate the existing 1,500 car parking ramp. It's woefully underutilized, and we would think that this would be a very unique opportunity where you could solve for the parking kind of free of cost and then try to implement some type of maybe entertainment, possibly some type of hospitality, something that could be an ancillary benefit to the surrounding community that probably has an occupancy solution that would be somewhat challenged if not given the advantage of a well-located, parking-free type environment. Yes, you'd have some of the ridership connectivity that the light rail would offer, but it to us really seems like that could be a pretty dynamic and unique solution for what otherwise I would contend is it's going to be kind of a tough piece of real estate to do a large-scale, meaningful development on.
Any quick questions? John, I'm thinking if we do 5 minutes per site, that's going to take us to 1:45. So
Right.
we could take maybe a quick question. Okay? Any haha?
So Minneapolis Avenue, this site is in Minneapolis. It's a 0.8 acre site with an existing building on it. It's a half a mile to the light rail station, and it's currently zoned light industrial. And our recommendation, one thing that differed, this site differed from some of the other sites that we looked at, was that they didn't have any park and ride feature right now existing, and so it was a little easier in that regard to decide to keep the existing structure. The city of Minneapolis, it's a 20,000 square foot structure that's light industrial. The city of Minneapolis is talked about how light industrial and kind of maker spaces are rapidly declining, and indicated a desire to keep the existing use. And there were a couple of uses that they did not want. One was charter schools, and the other was storage space. And so our panel's recommendation was that we keep the existing structure, maybe alter it a little bit, and talk to the surrounding community about potential uses. There's a couple of buildings north and south or east and west of, or next to this structure, to talk to them about potentially using it for additional space that they may need. The city thinks it's really important to have a space where that's creating jobs and that's transit oriented, and so this is on a bike corridor. It's close to transit, and that's pretty much what we discussed. Is there anything I'm missing?
Did you talk about community engagement?
Sure. The community that this building is in is a very highly Somali area, and so the city thinks it's really important to have discussions with the community surrounding the building first, and then going from there. So that would be the first step.
Great, any questions? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Just so the audience isn't completely dead, and you know we're really interested in the future, one thing that would help us new to this is maybe just a general orientation. What's the street? Sometimes we're looking at these and it's a little hard to figure out. Is that true, folks? Yeah, there's a lot of nods here. So they think we figured those two out.
Okay.
Okay, so to that point, the next subject property is located for the most part at the intersection of 280 and Como. If everyone can picture that, the way I always think this intersection is Health Partners has a large office building. That's how I sort of sneak in the back door to the state fairgrounds. So it's an interesting site. We have pretty much to the west a solid industrial base. To the east, we have some residential. There's a school over there, and then sort of in the northeast, we end up having a lot of apartments, many of them aged, and then we have the Luther Seminary development. They're an amazing parcel as you go from 280 into the state fairgrounds along Como. Then a little further east, you have St. Anthony, a cute little neighborhood community that is charming and has been well developed and has a very high disposable income and a high educated base in that area, given the University of Minnesota on both sides of 280 here. So as far as that's the macro location, the micro location is that we have really a small postage stamp site. It's about a half of an acre right at that intersection that's up against the freeway. And so overall, the site itself is limited in that it's just not big enough to really develop anything of scale with it. Immediately north of the subject property, there's a surface parking lot that's owned by Health Partners. We understand that Health Partners is looking at developing a new facility just east of the subject property. And so one of the thoughts was perhaps there's the opportunity to integrate that northern surface parking lot that Health Partners owns into the subject property to make something that's larger in scale, really could be developable. Along with that, we have some inherent complications because of the northern edge of our property line. We transition from St. Paul to Lauderdale, a different community. So we're hoping that the communities would see the greater benefit of doing something more intense together, because each site itself is probably not developable than what it is today parking. Net Transit shared with us that this is not a highly needed facility today in the future. It needs to be a bus stop, but need not be a parking lot as it is today. That almost works to the detriment of what their goal is, since most of the people in this area already have other bus service running in and through it. So overall, the intersection we think is strong. One of the complications, in addition to being small, is it is right up against the freeway. 280 is a very active freeway, so whatever gets developed there, part of it is we're below grade a bit, so part of the site's going to look into the freeway, and certainly whatever gets developed here is going to have freeway noise that has to be integrated into the final design from that. The other major thing is that in addition to the Health Partners ultimately developing a new site, which I think is a benefit, is the Luther Seminary site. It isn't in the marketplace, it will be in the marketplace shortly. It's a magnificent site, it's gorgeous, wooded, and so somehow one of probably these two larger developers to my left are going to end up developing that site or someone else, which very likely will integrate some type of market rate housing, just given the nature of the site, the setting of the site. So it's our sort of thought that what is here today is any type of contemporary workforce housing, and that perhaps this could be an alternative to what ultimately will be developed in the seminary site. But to do so, again, you have to combine these parcels and make a larger parcel. Possibly, if you could put in some type of workforce housing, working with a not-for-profit, you could have some basic retail on the base, but on a limited basis. This is just not a walkable community today, and the only daytime driver of traffic is Health Partners. And so, in essence, that would be our recommendation, is to combine the parcels, see if you can put together a complicated development agreement with the various municipalities, have it be workforce housing, either try and beat the Luther Seminary site, or it might be okay to let it lag with how partners move, and the more market rate housing, this could be an initial alternative to that. Thank you.
So the Coon Rapids Riverdale Station, for those of you who are not familiar, this is located just south of the Main Street retail corridor, which is, largely a regional retail corridor that's got roughly probably from 1 million to 1.5 million square feet. It does have a significant traffic way and a significant, business retail generation. And you can see the top of the Target box on the north end of the image there. The land immediately south of that is a 15-acre parcel that Sherman just recently was awarded an RP on. And their plans are to build 180 units of market rate and 71 units of workforce housing under a TIF district. Some other observations about the site is that there's currently a power line that's running practically to the middle of the site that would need to be relocated. There's at this time a 70-foot easement, which makes it almost undevelopable. So that power line unfortunately cannot be buried and would need to be relocated. And the suggestion there is we move it southeast along the rail, and which would open up the opportunity. The other challenge, I guess, with this site or observation is just the linear nature of it. From a circulation standpoint and a site planning standpoint, it's tough to kind of maximize the site and make good use of it. There is currently a dry pond that's on the north end that, depending on what direction the site was developed or redeveloped on, you get into these kind of a park feature. This station is under pretty good demand and usage from a park and ride standpoint. There's 455 stalls there today, and there's 70% usage, so roughly 300 some stalls are being used. So as you're looking at redevelopment, we need to figure out how to make sure that the park riding component is satisfied, the circulation for the buses, and so on. As far as opportunities are concerned, we really look at it and saying, commercial is probably not going to be the highest and best use. If there was to be any kind of a commercial component, it would likely be on the southern edge, right at the signalized intersection at Northdale. And that use we see is probably, it's certainly not retail, but more so maybe medical, light medical, chiropractic, wellness, dental type of groups, and probably a small footprint in nature. Really, we think the highest best use is likely affordable housing. And what that would be to do row housing that would be kind of complementary to what Sherman's project has to offer, and making sure that as we're doing that both groups are working together to make sure that there's connectivity from a pedestrian and vehicle standpoint. Another thought that the site could be, if it does not go, kind of traditional commercial or residential, would be, potentially a big storage site.
The only street access to the southeast.
Yeah, so there's one access point, and well, it's a signalized intersection that would be at the northern edge of the property. There you go. Thank you.
Are those high tension power lines? Are they the large towers, or are they more the traditional power lines?
Yeah, I don't know what voltage there, but maybe.
Yeah, 115 volt.
Okay.
Yeah. So and currently 37 feet in height.
So it should be very movable. Sorry.
Okay, so the site is located at 6151 East River Road in Fridley, and the site itself incorporates two different parcels. The lower parcel, there's a small rectangular portion owned by about 5,000 square feet, owned by the city of Fridley. And on the northern portion, there's 3 single-family homes. A unique aspect of the site is that there's a gas line running kind of diagonally through the site itself, which creates an obstacle to redevelopment, so that would need to be relocated for new development. development on the site. And it would also, it's currently zoned public as well, so it would require rezoning. From our perspective, and it's separated as well by a right-of-way. From our perspective, it's a great opportunity for housing in this region and the location itself, but we are not the only ones that think so. There's about 600 new units coming online or under development and proposed by other housing developers, including market rate, senior, and mixed income, and then an additional 100 additional units being renovated as well. So those are all within close proximity. The site is within a QCT, so it is a great opportunity for financing for 4% bond development to create new affordable housing units. Additionally, a challenge of the site is that the rail line, the North-South commuter rail, really separates the west from the east side of the community. So there is access underneath the line through a tunnel, very well lit and new tunnel, which connects the site to the Fridley market for convenience and retail shopping within about a 10-minute walk. So in additional to potential housing could be some specialized commercial, whether it be a CVS or childcare, daycare facility were some recommendations. And we would really recommend, waiting to see how the market absorbs the housing units and everything moving forward with development. Questions?
All right, the last site is at 322 Wayzata Boulevard in Wayzata. The site is 1.8 acres, and on the north side is Wayzata Boulevard. Across the street is a city park. To the south, about half a mile or less, is Lake Minneapolis and the downtown, the very walkable downtown of Wayzata. To the west is, on the corner, is a single-story florist greenhouse use. And then on to the east is a three-story multifamily building. So currently the site has 102 parking stalls. It's a park and ride with a bus turnaround. It has fairly limited transit access. It's all bus. There are 4 lines. 3 of them are express with pretty limited service during the day. One runs 7 days a week. The parking lot is about 60% utilized on an average weekday. And one of the important parts of this site is that it is towards the end of the line, so it is an important terminus to maintain from Metro Transit's perspective. Some of the challenges is that Metro Transit does want to keep at least that 60% of parking spaces that are currently being utilized, so it's about 60 parking spaces, as well as the bus turnaround and some accommodations for bus layover and driver amenities while they're waiting for the next route to start up. Another challenge that we found, and we had the great expertise of Jeff from the city weighing in on this, is that there is a desire by the city of Wayzata to kind of keep the cute kind of culture of the city, and they're a little bit, fair to say, afraid of night. So, diplomatically speaking. It's a great market, so from an opportunity perspective, it's fantastic. It doesn't have some of the encumbrances that some of the other sites do in terms of easements or utility issues. So from that perspective, it's great. There's also obviously a high demand in this community for high-end housing. There's also kind of a sense from the community that there's some fatigue of that and some desire to see something else. So our recommendations are, first and foremost, the site is zoned commercial right now. We feel like that is not a good use with the very walkable and desirable downtown being fairly close to the site. and some vacancies in that district already. We don't feel like this site would be very attractive from a retail or commercial perspective. So we think that it would be useful for the city to pursue rezoning of this parcel for residential use. We also feel like it would be advantageous for the city and Metro Transit to look at acquiring the sites to the west of this on the corner, the florist sites, see if that's an opportunity for them. The biggest challenge for redevelopment of this is accommodating the 60 parking spaces and the bus turnaround while getting some level of unit count and density on the site without upsetting the neighbors. So all that's right, good luck.
10-story towers on the.
So yeah, 10, 15, 29. So we do think that multifamily is the highest and best use for this site because of some of the other development happening and some of the desires from the city and kind of concerns about displacement. It would be useful to look at workforce housing, which would probably be family-sized units, so 2 and 3 bedroom units, in order to get the financing for that. That is also a city priority, is to preserve their existing affordable housing and create a little bit more. Another alternative would be perhaps senior housing, and then finally some smaller units kind of going in the other direction, more micro-style units to attract young professionals who may use the transit lines and the express buses to downtown, maybe grew up in the community, want to stay in the community, can't afford to live there, but there's not really that product in the market right now.
So we have the FTA comments.
Could we, sorry, could we reverse the order of those last 2 slides?
Sure.
So that our object here today is really to use all of these to kind of think more globally about development of what are potentially underutilized assets in kind of key strategic places in the community. We're hoping to solve more problems than we create today. I think that one of the things that comes through very clearly is that this whole concept of joint development, so that the FTC and Metro Transit and the communities really want to see good development occur. They want to see these properties utilized in ways that are beneficial to the community and that support the overall objectives of a holistic and workable transit system. And so one of the things that came up for us very quickly is that we need to have a kind of a coordinated effort between Metro Transit, who's really the authority here and the owner, with each of the communities. Because these communities have aspirations. They generally have visions for what they want on these properties. And as developers, we really want to be invited into a dialogue that's meaningful. We want to have confidence that staff and policymakers are in concert and are ready to help us really evaluate and try to do good things. The pursuit cost that comes with uncertainty, really crosses off any site that doesn't have those things. And I think it's really important to understand the local process. As we've gone through this, I think there really are kind of 2 things that have emerged as impediments. One is that, dealing with the Federal Transportation Commission adds a layer of approval and uncertainty. And as our friends at Metro Transit told us, Lucy said that she doesn't give the federal government deadlines. And so, you have to come into this knowing that there's a bit of uncertainty about what that process is going to look like. Now, with that said, there are a couple of really notable successes. And so it's not a black box. It's not as though staff doesn't understand what's going on. And so we think that's one of the really key takeaways, is that we need to have a coordinated effort. And forums like this are helpful. But when it comes to a particular opportunity, it's really important that the public and private entities can work together. We talked a little bit about an awareness campaign. I think, the Metro Transit is doing a good job of trying to attract development. I'm going to invite any of my panelists here to chime in. I mean, we get solicitations all the time from municipalities and from government agencies, and I think it takes a little bit more than that. And I think this is where maybe the local municipalities can exercise a little bit more leadership, and by sort of, beginning some of that pre-development work, and that may be as simple as just really being able to articulate a vision and help people understand what the opportunities and the constraints are on site. It's much easier to respond to an opportunity than, a specific opportunity than it is to have this sort of abstract blank slate. And especially if that sheet of paper is starting with has lots and lots of constraints around it. And so I think that sort of direct outreach to developers, and this is something that our public entities are going to have to figure out how to navigate, how to both have a solicitation process that meets the overall objectives of a public body in terms of fairness, but really is targeted enough to actually have some impact. Broadcast to developers and brokers, may be useful, but that's really a very hit or miss thing. I think it works if you happen to hit somebody on a day when you have a requirement that might work. If you really want to generate demand, that's going to take a more targeted approach. I think that finding reasons and trying to match up needs and opportunities is right at the core of that. Most of the communities know what they would like to have here, and so they should be targeting developers who do that, who work in those markets and understand what's going on there. I think we saw some case studies today for some projects that have happened. That's super helpful for the development community to kind of understand how these projects have been generated, what that process looked like, what was at risk, and how long did it take, and just really having open communication. We've had good experiences working with, and of course getting together like this helps. It's we were joking this morning, it's harder to ignore someone that you know than it is somebody that you have some relationship with. So we encourage the public officials to continue to be engaged through forums like this and to have relationships with each of us. And then, before we jump into the, I kind of flip the order of this, but the Metro Transit, because these sites tend to realize value over time as the transit system becomes more complete and more functional. They like to retain ownership of the properties and do longer-term ground leases. It seems to be working in many instances. I think that many of these opportunities rise to a level where people are going to be willing to do what it takes to do business there, but not every site meets that criteria. And so for the public agencies to be able to consider dispositions where that's appropriate and to be able to provide some reasonable guidance about whether or not that's going to work. Before we jump into this last piece, this is really the meat of what we're here to talk about. We'd love to invite any discussion from any of the public officials or really anybody that's here today.
So I have a question. Are all 6 of these sites under FTA approval in terms of what you do with them, or do easements, or you do this, or you do that? Or was some of them bought with non-FTA funded money so that they're not part of the FTA purview? The reason I ask that is twofold. One is, when we built on the light rail, FTA is involved and it added about a year to our development time. And 2 is a function of their process was very opaque. You'd send it out, and then they'd send back an answer. There's Mr. Wizard in Washington. And you never knew the reason why something did get done or didn't get done. You just said yes or no. And the third part of that is, for us, one point of contact would be really helpful at Metro Transit. We went through 4 different people while we were building our project, and there's a learning curve. Every time one left, we had to educate a new one. So that was frustrating. So I think it would be helpful if you're going to market a site, if it's a non-FTA site, that should be part of the marketing material, so you know you're not dealing with those folks. Unless they're all FTA involved, and then everybody knows, but you should say that too in your marketing materials.
You know, as a practical matter, when we asked that question, the answer was that really almost every one of them has enough FTC involvement that there's probably going to be, is it FTC or FTA?
FTA.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've been saying that wrong. It's almost certainly going to involve an FTA process. I'm going to invite Lucy to speak to that. I think that the local groups are gaining experience, and you know, it is a bit opaque, there's no question about it, but I think as projects get done and relationships get built, it becomes a little bit less opaque. And I mean, I can say that in the last 18 months, I've had a number of development projects that have touched Metro Transit. I've had a very good experience about finding access. You do sort of go from person to person, and there is sometimes a learning curve. But I'm going to invite Lucy to kind of use this really her.
Thank you, and let me know if I don't fully answer this. A couple of these properties, we haven't found an FTA interest in the property, but we are still investigating whether the improvements on the property had FTA money in them. So that one I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure about 4 of the sites, but not all 6. The FTA process has in the past been not clear. But then, and that's one reason they issued the guidance in 2014. The new FTA joint development guidance was developed precisely to make it clear, and here's what you have to do, here's what the criteria are. And the 2 projects we've done so far in this region have been under the new guidance. So I think that that is a challenge that we are all much better at. FTA's position on joint development now is to encourage it and to do what they can to help. I do want to emphasize that we don't get the federal government deadlines, but we've gotten very good turnaround and responsiveness now. And the process currently includes a preliminary application. So before you're ready to submit the final and have all of the information, we've done that quite successfully. We send in a preliminary application saying this is what we're doing, this is where we think we're going, this is what we think we're going to do. Do you see any problem with that? And the questions we get back from that mean that when the deal is done, when we send in the final application, we've answered a lot of their questions already. So I do think the FTA process has become more positive, and I certainly think that we now have some reason to believe we have a good relationship with the staff and kind of know how to put together the application in the first place. It's sort of like grant writing. The first one you do, you probably don't get the grant, but you do kind of get the language on the way by it. Did that answer your question, or do you have more questions?
You're done.
Sounds like having paid some tuition, you're ready to do some more.
Okay, and if I could say for point of contact, we have a mailbox, TOD@metrotransit.org, that we check all the time, or you can just email me directly. My cards are here, and it's lucy.galbraith@metrotransit.org, and I try very hard to be very responsive and respond to emails and phone calls as soon as I can. Sometimes that is not the same day. But part of our charge as the TOD office is to coordinate Met Council internally, so not just Metro Transit internally, but also the whole council. And if we don't know who's the right person, we'll track them down.
Questions or comments? Yeah.
Sure. Most of these sites are Metro Transit developed park and rides, or they've been around for a while, and they have residual baggage, a lot of them. How can Metro Transit, when they're developing new sites, to prepare for future TOD as these network builds out and there's more attractiveness to these properties?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know how many new ones are coming, but I think that invite any of my panelists here to join in. But I think that simply engaging with the private sector in the planning process and thinking downstream. I mean, it's taking sort of a master planning approach so that there's an active thought about how those improvements might convey value downstream is really the simple answer. That's a much better approach than trying to cobble it together after the fact.
And I think we're in a transition state. We, the TOD office, have been putting together guidelines for the right-of-way acquisition and the acquisitions for our next projects, the Green Line Extension and the Blue Line Extension, so that we avoid unnecessarily complicating the property in the process. You know, mostly in the past it was, we're going to use this for transit, why not give an easement to somebody to do something? And so we're trying to avoid all that going forward.
Question in the back.
Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering about parking requirements on these sites. I'm wondering if you're seeing your investors or banks that are willing to finance projects that have less parking requirements, if we have enough momentum now that we can get away with getting less parking.
Yeah. Sue is probably pretty well suited to talk to that. I mean, clearly parking requirements are changing depending upon where you're developing. Some communities won't allow parking. So I think that's very much a site thing. But as a developer, one of the things that is happening is that what we need today is maybe very different from what we need in the near term. So this, I give kind of a similar answer to the last one, where I think a master planning approach is think in phases and try to set things up so that if there's excess parking that's going to be required for an initial phase, you have the ability to add improvements downstream.
I would agree. I think depending on the municipality, for example, Minneapolis, they've really significantly reduced the parking requirements. They sort of get that longer term, that driverless cars probably going to happen, that they have those experiences in service parking lots that we don't have. I think that they're pushing more for shared parking, so they complementary uses, daytime, evening, to perhaps reduce the overall parking count. I would say overall, I think everyone's at least awake and conscious that probably would be the parking requirements that we've traditionally demanded, just whether they're prepared to take that step and be more bold with it.
And I'd like to add to that, we've done a couple of projects where we have used where bike parking has counted toward our parking requirements. And so we always now, going forward, ask if bike racks count toward parking spots.
Just an observation, kind of building on that one. I think Minneapolis is taking great steps. St. Paul is a little farther behind, but we've also, I think, reduced our parking requirements to the point where it's usually driven by the development side. I guess my question is, to the extent they're different parties, are the developers in the same place as the folks who finance, or is there daylight between you? In terms of how you're looking at this parking needs?
That's a great question. I'm working on a site here in downtown Minneapolis, very connected to the whole transit system. And, I don't think the lenders have any requirement for parking. I think that that's changing so fast, that people want to have confidence that it's going to work. That if there's parking that's needed, that is there. I think one of the things that we've run into is that as these ordinances change, some of these things are hard to legislate. So in the city of Minneapolis, for example, some of the parking rights come as give you the ability to build parking as an ancillary or auxiliary use to support a primary use. And there's sort of an unintended consequence in the language so that if you offer parking for revenue, all of a sudden it can't be an auxiliary use. Well, that really wipes out the ability to do district parking. And when you're investing in structured parking in an urban environment, you really, and especially if you want to minimize it, think the overall objective is to try to keep those stalls all utilized for as many hours of every day as you possibly can. But I think we're all learning about that. We did find on our project, we ultimately got to a solution. I think the final form was probably, I think everybody on both sides would say it was suboptimal. But you know, we had to work with the statutes. So maybe, you know, going forward there'll be an opportunity to start to articulate some other principles, you know, the principles of shared use and the district approach that might give us more flexibility on how to do that. I know that some of the suburbs have done, Edina, you know, the 50th of France has a district parking solution that works really, really well. And I believe there may be some others as well.
If I may just jump in on that point too, I mean, one group that maybe hasn't quite been expressed is the tenant, because it does have to work for their business, and that's the one part, as much as I think we can all agree. Certainly on the development side, I'd love not to have to do parking. It has a profoundly positive impact to a pro forma, but the reality being, if you can't get a tenant to go in there, it doesn't matter if you have a lender, it doesn't matter if you have a great site, it may not work. So I do think there's a fine balance, and one of the things that I thought was interesting, kind of going back to the site that we kicked it off with at Bloomington location, where we have an abundance of parking. Now, how do you activate that and kind of leverage that? Because it's, dare I say, gift with purchase or given to you. And I think that we had a pretty good conversation about, you know, thinking about repurposing and trying to take advantage of that asset, because I think it's going to be a challenge going forward is how do you try to activate maybe what is going to become potentially obsolete parking space that may be cost prohibitive to completely tear down and redo, but also give you that ability to meet the market. I can't tell you how much time we spend on our speculative industrial projects specifically about trying to forecast, well, how many trucks do they need, how we're going to park it, and I say 9 times out of 10. The deals that you end up missing in those scenarios are you either can't park the user or you don't have enough loading for the user. And that's just a microcosm. I think that's going to permeate across all the different asset categories as we continue to look forward into a very dynamic future as it relates to transit.
One other thing that I would add is that you know, the parking demands and transportation generally are likely to change a lot in the next decade. And I don't know that any of us are smart enough to really accurately predict. And when you think about structured parking in particular, it's a very, very meaningful capital investment. And I think, you know, we need to be very thoughtful about that, particularly in emerging suburban markets where, you know, we're seeing densities in places like Bloomington, Edina, Eden Prairie, you know, where it was developed under one paradigm, and now all of a sudden it's really shifting to a much denser use and becoming connected to modes of activity with places like Uptown where school works and ride sharing and you know, really had a very profound impact on what's required. So this needs to be an ongoing
I would just say if you're going to build a parking structure, I would be thinking about what's the next use of that parking structure. So I wouldn't go to anything other than a flat parking deck and just be cognizant that it's probably going to have different use in the next decade than it is today.
Any other questions or comments? I think that the last, go ahead.
I just have a question more for Metro Transit about your approach with each site and how you work with the communities to sell them or to develop them. You know, we, as local governments, we only have a few tools in our toolboxes, but is it, does it depend on the site, depend on what the community really wants? Is there any kind of strategic approach with each site or all the sites?
Well, Metro Transit and Met Council, we're not going to go forward unless we can go forward in partnership with the city. It's the cities have the land use authority. You know, we are property owners in a sense acting in this context. So we regard it as absolutely critical that we do that early in the process. We don't do it at the very beginning. We spend some time figuring out whose money bought this, you know, what easements are there, digging through old project files. putting together the kind of basic information, but then we reach out to the communities as we have to kind of start the conversation. And I have to say, and I think that this is from other governments and not us since we're new, but we show up and people go, well, why didn't you come to us earlier? And it's like, we just got here. So, but we don't see any other way to do it. And I think, we're just now kind of figuring out what are our best tools, but I think our first move with every community is going to be a memorandum of understanding, a non-binding agreement that just sort of lays out, here's where we think we're going and here's what we see the roles and responsibilities, and just kind of a roadmap to be developed by both sides before we do anything else. So that's, and more process, more protocols, more steps to be determined later.
So what happens in Wayzata might be different. That memorandum would be different in Fridley.
Oh, yes. We have kind of a bullet dot list of things to cover in a memorandum of understanding, but it will be completely site and community specific. Because our communities, this region has such a variety of places and histories and community needs, visions, et cetera, that I've only lived here 4 years, but I've already noticed that Wayzata and Fridley are different.
So the last piece that we're asked to address is sort of the financing structure for these. And Metro Transit and the FTA have a clear bias to retaining ownership to these sites. I think what we understand is that there are a couple of objectives. One is that they want to maintain control from a transit standpoint. So want to maintain clear access, make sure that what happens on these sites serves mobility and the overall objectives of a transit system. But the other seems to be that there's a kind of a core assumption that as the metropolitan area builds out and as the transit system builds out, the value of these fixed investments in transit will increase over time. And so that's part of what the FTA looks at when they're considering joint development. So the preferred vehicle is a ground lease, and I think that's how the stadium deal was done. I don't know about all of the others. As a developer, we talked about this quite a bit. And, you can see that the ground lease structure could be advantageous in a place where Minnehaha, where we think the most likely outcome is that some use is going to be generated organically, by a community that's changing, and it probably going to involve a reuse of some existing improvements that may very well help by reducing the equity requirement for somebody to come in. In a place like Wayzata, where you're going to be making a much larger fixed investment and it's going to require third-party financing, that may be a little bit of an impediment. So we as developers have strongly encouraged the public entities to consider a whole range of alternatives. And I think one that the folks at Metro Transit shared with us is that there's a possibility of the public entity having a carried interest that would get out of the way of traditional financing, but still allow them to have to benefit from appreciation and value creation that leverages that public investment. So I think we're early enough in this game that it's hard to be definitive about that, but I think if you all would comment, I think it would be fair to say that we all see that as more of a hurdle than a benefit to figure out how to work around the ground lease. So that really concludes our comments, and we're open to any further questions or conversation.
I just want to say on behalf of ULI Minnesota, and just give those in the room that maybe have not gone through a process like this, is a special thank you to the panel. They are volunteering their time. There was some pre-work that was needed to be done as part of this process. John prepared a bunch of background market information pro bono. Pat Masha with Brigham and Morgan offers this space free for us to be able to do these types of events for ULI Minnesota, so we wouldn't be able to do it with our members. And then the client, Metro Transit, or Metro TOD Office, and Michael and Lucy did a lot of pre-work to try to pull this all together. So I just want to recognize everyone and thank you for all of this. And it is something, it is a service that we offer for cities, for other sites. If you have sites, we would welcome the opportunity to take a look at doing a similar process. So thank you so much.